I had been planning this night for weeks, not because it was an anniversary or a birthday, but because I felt like something needed to shift between us. My name is Adrian. I'm 38, and I've been married to Lila for just over 10 years. We've shared a lot: our home, our routines, our lives. But somewhere along the way, the spark that used to make ordinary moments feel extraordinary had dimmed. It wasn't dramatic, not in the sense of arguments or yelling. It was quiet, slow, subtle. I'd come home, and Lila would be on her laptop or scrolling endlessly through her phone. The casual touches had become almost accidental. Hugs were brief, smiles polite, almost reflexive. I knew she still cared, but the intimacy, the real connection, seemed to have been traded for convenience. I'm not complaining. I understand life gets messy. Work piles up. Kids demand attention. Bills never stop coming. But I also knew that the absence of little gestures, the hand held across the kitchen counter, the playful teasing in bed, the knowing glance that said, "I see you," those were the things that kept us tethered. And for months now, those moments were gone. Tonight, I wanted to try something different. I had bought her a small gift, a handcrafted bracelet from a little shop in Charleston I'd stumbled across while on a work trip. It wasn't expensive, nothing showy, just a token of thoughtfulness. Something to say, without words, that I still notice her, that I still care. We were sitting across from each other at the dinner table. I had cooked something simple, but comforting: roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and steamed vegetables. Lila had taken her usual spot, scrolling through her phone as if I wasn't even there. I placed the plate in front of her, and she finally looked up, smiled briefly, and said, "Everything smells nice." That smile was polite, the kind of smile you give someone when you're trying not to hurt their feelings. It wasn't dismissive, but it wasn't warm either. I took a deep breath. "Lila, I have something for you." I reached into the small bag I'd placed next to her plate and pulled out the bracelet. She raised an eyebrow, glanced at it, and then, with a half smile, said, "Just don't get jealous, but you should." Her words caught me off guard, not because of the jealousy part, but because of the tone, playful, teasing, almost flirtatious in a way I hadn't heard in months. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with anticipation. There was a spark there, buried under the layers of routine and distraction, and suddenly it felt real again. I could feel it in the quiet of the dining room, in the pause that followed her words. I set the gift down in front of her. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands, and laughed softly. "It's beautiful," she said. "You always know how to pick something subtle, yet meaningful." For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like if the intimacy we once had returned in full force. The late-night conversations, the touches that lingered, the playful banter that made ordinary moments feel alive. But then I remembered how we had gotten here, how easy it was for life to drown the small gestures, how we had allowed the silence to grow, how I had stopped trying because every attempt had been met with polite indifference. I had to be careful not to let my hopes run ahead of reality. "I'm glad you like it," I said quietly, reaching across the table just slightly, letting my fingers brush against hers. She looked at me, paused, and didn't pull away. That tiny pause felt like a crack in the wall between us. I wanted to speak, to say something profound, something that would rekindle the connection, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I simply let the moment exist, letting her see that I was still here, still present, still noticing. She wore the bracelet almost immediately, fastening it around her wrist with careful precision. "It suits me," she said, looking at her reflection in the window across the table. Then she turned back to me, and for the first time in weeks, her gaze held something more than politeness. There was a spark of curiosity, of interest, of perhaps remembering who we were when we first met. The rest of dinner passed in near silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was different. There was tension, yes, but also potential. The kind of potential that exists when two people know there's work to do, but are willing to try anyway. I didn't force conversation. I let the quiet settle around us, letting the meal, the candlelight, and the soft clatter of cutlery create a rhythm that reminded us of shared experiences. After dessert, a simple vanilla panna cotta I had made the night before, we lingered at the table. Lila looked at me, smiled again, and said, "You really didn't have to do this." I shook my head. "I know, but I wanted to. It's important to me that we remember each other in these small ways." Her smile softened, and for a fleeting moment, It felt like we were teenagers again. The kind of teenagers who stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, who laughed until their sides hurt, who touched without hesitation or fear of intrusion. The bracelet was a symbol, yes, but more than that, it was a reminder. A reminder that the connection we once had was still buried somewhere beneath the routines, the obligations, the noise of life. We cleared the table together. She was quieter than usual, thoughtful. I could feel her presence differently, not distant, not distracted, but curious, engaged. She didn't say much, but the way she moved around the kitchen, the way she looked at me occasionally with a hint of softness in her eyes, told me she was seeing me again in a way she hadn't in months. Later, when we moved to the living room, she leaned back on the couch, the bracelet glinting faintly in the lamplight. I sat beside her, careful not to invade the space that had grown so habitual, so defensive. And yet, even in that measured distance, there was a shift. We spoke in small sentences, catching up on the day, on the mundane, on little victories. But beneath the mundane, there was a subtle tension, a gentle awareness that something significant had passed between us tonight. Something quiet, but deliberate. I realized then that it wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about noticing, about patience, about being present even when it felt like the world had drifted elsewhere. And in that quiet presence, there was power. Power to remind each other why we had chosen to share our lives. Power to break down walls not with shouting, but with attention, with care, with subtle acts that said, "I see you, still." By the time the night ended, I felt something shift within me as well. Not a complete resolution, not a magical fix, but a moment of clarity. A moment that reminded me that connection isn't always loud. It's sometimes quiet. Sometimes it's found in a simple gift, in a soft smile, in a hand that doesn't pull away. As I watched her leave the room to get ready for bed, I thought about the weeks ahead. I thought about how easy it could have been to ignore the quiet drift we had fallen into. But tonight had reminded me that attention, subtlety, and intention could still create moments of intimacy, even in the routine of married life. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. And sometimes, real is far more powerful than spectacle. And for the first time in months, as I leaned back in my chair, I felt a quiet hope stirring. Not a naive hope. Not one that expects fireworks every night, but a steady, grounded hope. A hope that the small gestures, the careful attention, and the willingness to notice each other might just be enough to remind us of who we were and who we still could be.